Picture America in the late 1990s, a Friday night. For millions of families, it meant one thing: a trip to the store with the blue and yellow sign, Blockbuster. This wasn't just a video rental, it was a ritual. The electric buzz of possibility under those fluorescent lights, the endless aisles of plastic cases, a tangible promise of entertainment, the thrill of the hunt for a new release, the disappointment of an empty shelf, and the consolation prize of discovering a hidden gem you'd never heard of. It was a sensory experience, a social hub, a cornerstone of suburban life.
By the year 2000, this ritual had built an empire. Blockbuster was a colossus. Over 9,000 stores stretched across the globe, from the bustling cities of America to the quiet suburbs of Australia and the growing markets of South America. They dominated 70% of the video rental market, generating billions in revenue. Their brand was as recognizable as Coca-Cola or McDonald's. To Wall Street, they were a darling, a seemingly unstoppable force in the entertainment industry. They were the king. And the king, seated comfortably on his throne of VHS tapes and late fees, saw no rivals on the horizon.
But empires are most vulnerable when they feel most secure. The very pillars of Blockbuster's success, its physical stores, its massive inventory, and its notorious late fees, were the foundations upon which its challenger would build a revolution. This is not just a story of a business that failed. This is a story of arrogance, of a fatal miscalculation, and of a future that was not just ignored, but actively rejected. This is the story of how a giant fell and the lesson it offers every company today.
Every Goliath has his David. And this David was born not from a sling, but from a $40 late fee. In 1997, a computer scientist and entrepreneur named Reed Hastings returned his copy of Apollo 13 to his local Blockbuster, weeks overdue. The penalty was brutal. He was embarrassed and frustrated. But where most people would just grumble and pay up, Hastings saw something else, a fundamental flaw in a beloved system. He thought, what if there were no due dates? What if renting a movie was as simple as checking your email?
That simple, frustrating question was the spark. Alongside his partner, Mark Randolph, Hastings founded a company in Scotts Valley, California. They called it Netflix. Their original model was a hybrid. You could browse a website, a novel concept in itself at the time, and the DVDs would be mailed to your home in distinctive red envelopes. No late fees, ever. It was a direct and deliberate attack on Blockbuster's most hated profit center. The early days were humble. The first DVD they mailed was Beetlejuice. Their initial subscriber base was a trickle, not a flood. To the titans in Dallas, Blockbuster's headquarters, Netflix was a curiosity, a niche service for tech geeks and early adopters, a flea buzzing around the ankles of an elephant. Blockbuster's CEO at the time, John Antioco, would later famously dismiss them as a very small niche business. He couldn't see that this niche was, in fact, the blueprint for the future. Netflix wasn't just renting movies, it was building a relationship with its customers based on convenience and trust, two currencies Blockbuster had badly devalued.
The year is 2000. The dot-com bubble has just burst. Skepticism towards internet companies is at an all-time high. For Netflix, the situation is precarious. They are burning through cash, and the path to profitability is unclear. Reed Hastings, a pragmatist, decides to make a bold move. He flies to Dallas, Texas, to the gleaming headquarters of Blockbuster. His mission? To propose a partnership. He sits down with John Antioco and his team. His offer is stunningly audacious. He proposes that Blockbuster acquire Netflix for a mere $50 million. In return, Netflix would run Blockbuster's brand online, becoming the digital face of the video rental giant. It was a lifeline. It was an admission that Blockbuster's brand power and physical presence were, at that moment, insurmountable. It was also a chance for Blockbuster to buy the future for pocket change.
The meeting was a disaster, and Tiyoko and his team were baffled. Why would they buy this tiny, unprofitable mail-order company? Their business was bricks and mortar, not virtual envelopes. They saw Netflix's market, a few 100,000 subscribers, as insignificant. They saw the internet itself as a fad for a niche audience. The arrogance was palpable. They laughed Hastings out of the room. This wasn't just a rejected business deal. It was a catastrophic failure of imagination. Blockbuster had the chance to neutralize its greatest threat and absorb the very technology that would destroy it for less than 0.1% of what Netflix would eventually be worth. They didn't just miss an opportunity. They looked the future in the eye, called it ugly, and slammed the door. It was one of the most expensive mistakes in corporate history. While Blockbuster was rejecting its future, it was simultaneously alienating its present. The engine of its profitability was also the source of its customers' deepest hatred: late fees. In its peak years, Blockbuster generated a staggering $800 million annually from late fees, accounting for nearly 16% of its revenue. This was not a byproduct of their business. It was a core feature. For customers, it was a form of psychological warfare. The anxiety of the ticking clock, the dread of the yellow overdue slip on the cassette, the feeling of being ripped off at the counter, and created a toxic relationship. Customers didn't love Blockbuster. They tolerated it because they had no other choice. Netflix's no late fees policy wasn't just a feature. It was a declaration of war on this entire punitive system.
Even when Blockbuster saw customers flocking to Netflix, they were slow to change. When they finally attempted to eliminate late fees in 2004 under Antiocho's new strategy, it was a case of too little, too late. The move was poorly communicated to franchisees who relied on that revenue, and it confused customers who no longer trusted the brand. Furthermore, the no late fees policy was often a misnomer. Instead of fees, they would simply charge the full price of the DVD if it wasn't returned after a week, then forgive the charge if the disc was brought back later. It was perceived as a sleight of hand, further eroding trust.
Blockbuster had spent years training its customers to hate it. It had built a business model on penalizing its users for being loyal. And when a competitor offered them respect and convenience, they left in droves. Blockbuster wasn't just beaten by a better technology, it was bled dry by 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. By the mid-2000s, the walls were closing in. Netflix was growing exponentially, and a new threat was emerging: video streaming. Blockbuster, now fully aware of the danger, went into a panic. Their response was a textbook example of too late and badly executed. First, they tried to copy the Netflix model with Blockbuster Online. It was a decent clone, but it lacked the sophisticated recommendation algorithm that Netflix had spent years refining. To compete, they launched a desperate price war, offering subscriptions at a loss. It burned cash at an alarming rate, further weakening the company. Then, in a move of sheer desperation, they tried to become a one-stop shop for entertainment. In 2004, they launched a disastrous deal with Radio Shack, setting up mini Blockbuster kiosks inside their stores. The concept was confusing for customers and a logistical nightmare. It was a distraction, not a solution.
The final, fatal strategic blunder came from the top.
John Antioco, who was finally pushing for the necessary but expensive digital transformation, was ousted by the board of directors and the activist investor Carl Icahn. They saw his plans as too costly. They replaced him with Jim Keyes, a former 7-Eleven CEO, whose strategy was to double down on physical stores. He famously said, "I've been frankly confused by this fascination that everybody has with Netflix. We've got the internet covered now between our kiosks, our buy mail, and our downloads." He was wrong. He fundamentally misunderstood the tectonic shift happening in media consumption. The new leadership wasn't just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. They were insisting the iceberg was a mirage.
The end came not with a bang, but with a slow, painful whimper. The debt accumulated from failed initiatives and the crushing weight of thousands of underperforming stores became unsustainable. The 2008 financial crisis was the final blow, severing the company's access to credit and evaporating what was left of consumer discretionary spending. In 2010, burdened by nearly $1 billion in debt, Blockbuster was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The imagery was stark and symbolic: empty parking lots, deserted aisles, and liquidation sales where the very DVDs that once built the empire were sold off for pennies. It was a corporate wake.
A last-ditch effort to save the brand came from satellite TV provider Dish Network, which acquired Blockbuster's assets for $320 million in a 2011 auction. They had vague plans to use the brand to compete with Netflix, but the effort was half-hearted and underfunded. They closed the remaining corporate stores and eventually shut down the streaming service. The once mighty empire was now a ghost, its brand name used for a few surviving franchise stores and a faint echo of its former self.
A gloomy, solemn tone. In less than a decade, Blockbuster went from an industry-defining titan to a bankrupt relic. From 9,000 stores to zero. From a market cap in the billions to a fire sale acquisition. It was a collapse of epic proportions, a cautionary tale played out in real time on the world stage.
The story of Blockbuster is not a unique tragedy. It's a blueprint for failure that any company in any industry can follow. The lessons are etched into its corporate tombstone. Blockbuster thought it was in the video store business. Netflix understood it was in the entertainment delivery business. When you define yourself by your physical product or your current method of delivery, you become blind to new ways of solving the same customer need. The purpose was never to rent plastic cases. It was to provide convenient, enjoyable access to movies. Building a revenue stream on something your customers hate, like late fees, is a Faustian bargain. It creates a vulnerable flank that a competitor who aligns their success with customer satisfaction will inevitably exploit. Your most profitable customer should be your happiest customer, not your most penalized one. Blockbuster was obsessed with optimizing its existing profitable business model. It was a classic case of the innovator's dilemma. They were listening to their current customers and shareholders who wanted more stores and cheaper prices, while Netflix was creating a product for their future customers. If you're only focused on winning the current quarter, you will lose the next decade. The dismissal of Netflix as a niche player was a catastrophic failure of vision. It's the corporate equivalent of seeing a small cloud on the horizon and assuming it will pass, rather than recognizing it as the leading edge of a hurricane. No company is too big to fail. Disruption almost always comes from the periphery, from a player you don't consider a real competitor.
The ghost of Blockbuster does not rest. It haunts the boardrooms of every dominant company today. The epidemic of corporate blindness is ongoing. Look around. The signs are everywhere. Are the legacy car manufacturers wedded to the internal combustion engine, the new Blockbuster, staring down the barrel of the electric vehicle revolution? Are traditional cable companies, with their bloated packages and set-top boxes, the new Goliaths being picked off by streaming Davids? Is the entire fast fashion industry, built on unsustainable physical volume, about to be disrupted by digital customization and on-demand manufacturing? The question is not if disruption will come, but when and from where. The next Netflix is out there right now, in a garage, a co-working space, a university lab, looking at an industry giant and seeing not an insurmountable fortress, but a collection of outdated assumptions and customer frustrations. The fall of Blockbuster is not a relic of the past. It is a warning from history. It teaches us that no empire is permanent, that the greatest threat is often not what you see, but what you refuse to see. The ultimate lesson of Blockbuster is a simple, terrifying, and vital one. Complacency is a cancer, and the market has no mercy for those who stop listening to the future.
Subscribe to Business Obituaries. We're cooking up new stories of epic failures for you. Your like helps this channel grow.